For over a decade, Walter Carter, a 66-year-old man with a silver beard and a worn-out military backpack, became a fixture of the Brooklyn streets. But beneath his weathered exterior was a man who had once saved lives in the heat of battle, yet was now living in anonymity, forgotten by the very country he had served. Walter's story isn't just about survival. It's about the devastating reality many veterans face when they return home only to be abandoned by the system they once defended. Walter's journey began in the U.S. Army, where he dedicated more than 20 years of his life. He fought in multiple wars, including the devastating conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan. But after his honorable discharge in 2004, his life took a sharp and tragic turn. In 2008, after his beloved wife Evelyn succumbed to cancer, a disease misdiagnosed by the VA hospital, Walter fell into a deep spiral of grief. Unable to cope with his loss, he shut out his family, sold his home, and disappeared into the streets of New York City. The streets, he later admitted, offered him an anonymity that was easier to bear than being someone who had failed the person he loved most. Living on the streets of Brooklyn, Walter became a familiar face, though few knew his true story. He collected bottles for recycling, accepted food from kind strangers, and avoided becoming a nuisance to the local businesses. He never begged for help, choosing instead to survive with the military training that had taught him self-reliance. But despite his quiet demeanor, Walter was far more than the homeless man people saw. He was a hero, one who had been awarded the Bronze Star for valor after saving 17 lives during an ambush in Iraq. A man who once carried an injured Afghan child to safety during a humanitarian mission that briefly made him a symbol of American compassion. Yet the world saw him only as a homeless man. No one knew his true worth, and he was left to live in the shadows. Walter's story is a painful reminder of the injustice many veterans face when they return home, only to be forgotten by the system they fought to protect. But his journey was about to take an unexpected turn, and the world would finally see him for who he truly was. On a bitterly cold November day, Walter Carter found himself at his lowest. For 3 days he had gone without food, his body weak and trembling from hunger, with temperatures plummeting below freezing. His mind focused on survival, desperately needing something to sustain him. He slipped into Thompson's Corner Market, hoping to find something, anything to ease his hunger. Walter's hands shook as he quietly pocketed a day-old loaf of bread, a small act of desperation in a world that had long forgotten him. However, the store owner, Mr. Thompson, had recently installed security mirrors, and he quickly spotted Walter's actions. Without hesitation, Mr. Thompson confronted him, shouting, "Stop right there!" As Walter stood frozen, the bread still visible in his partially zipped jacket, the store owner immediately called the police. Walter didn't run. He didn't fight back. He simply stood still, his face a picture of resignation, knowing that this small act of survival would cost him dearly. 2 officers arrived minutes later, one of whom, Officer Daniels, noticed the worn dog tags hanging from Walter's neck. "You really a vet?" Daniels asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. Walter nodded quietly, stating, "I used to be someone useful, not anymore." But despite his service to the country, the law treated him like any other petty thief. He was arrested and processed, assigned a court date, and sent to the precinct, just another face in the system. What should have been a simple act of survival had turned into another painful reminder of how easily society forgets its heroes. Walter, a man who had given his life to defend his country, now found himself on the receiving end of the very system he had once fought for. The courtroom was filled with a sense of indifference as Walter Carter was escorted into the municipal building that morning. His clothes, wrinkled from a night in holding, spoke of the long road he had traveled since his days of military service. No one was there to speak up for him. No family, no friends. Just a few reporters covering more significant cases and the usual court employees going through their routine. The case was simple, or so it seemed. A homeless man charged with stealing a loaf of bread from a local market, just another day in the courtroom. As the proceedings began, the prosecutor stood adjusting his tie as he read out the charges. "Your Honor, the defendant was caught stealing a loaf of bread from the local market. Given his prior incidents of petty theft and lack of fixed address, we recommend continued detention until trial." The clerk monotonously read out the case number. State versus Walter Carter. The judge, Honorable Michael Carmichael, barely acknowledged the defendant, his focus fixed on the case file in front of him. He was known for his stern demeanor and swift judgments, and Walter seemed to be just another case to be quickly processed. "Mr. Carter, how do you plead?" Judge Carmichael asked, finally lifting his gaze to the defendant. Walter's response was soft, almost inaudible. "Guilty, Your Honor." I was hungry. In the back of the room, someone snickered, and the judge immediately shot a glare in that direction, silencing the mockery. But his focus soon shifted back to the paperwork in front of him. It seemed like just another routine case, until something caught the judge's eye. As he read through Walter's identification details, the name Walter, Edward Carter, lingered in his mind. There was something about it. The judge's expression slowly changed from one of detached professionalism to one of disbelief. His hand gripped the edge of the bench tightly, his knuckles turning white. The courtroom, once filled with casual chatter and idle movements, suddenly fell silent. Judge Carmichael's eyes flitted between the file in front of him and the elderly man standing in front of him, his face weathered and tired. It took several long seconds for the realization to hit him. This man, this homeless figure, was not just another defendant. He was someone he had never forgotten, even after all these years. Without saying a word, Judge Carmichael abruptly stood, causing a ripple of confusion throughout the room. It was rare for a judge to stand during a routine hearing, and the sudden shift in the courtroom's atmosphere was palpable. All eyes turned to the judge, waiting for an explanation, but none came. For several moments, Judge Carmichael remained silent, his face a mask of controlled emotion, trying to process what he had just discovered. The room was tense, the air thick with anticipation. No one knew what was happening, least of all Walter, who stood there, eyes fixed on the floor, unaware of the profound impact his name had just triggered. Finally, the judge spoke, his voice hoarse. "Court will take a 15-minute recess," he announced, his tone uncharacteristically rough. "The defendant will remain in custody." As the judge excited to his chambers, the courtroom erupted in whispers, the prosecutor unsure of the protocol when a judge suddenly stands and calls a recess without explanation. Looked on, visibly unsettled. Walter remained motionless, lost in thought, seemingly unconcerned by the unusual turn of events. He had no idea that the discovery of his identity had sent shockwaves through the courtroom. Back in his chambers, Judge Carmichael pulled a worn photograph from his desk drawer. It showed a group of military personnel in desert fatigues standing before a medical tent in Iraq. His hands trembled slightly as he gazed at the picture, now faded with age. In that picture, standing tall in the back row, was Walter Carter. The judge's heart skipped a beat. He recognized the face, though it had been years since he had seen it. This man had saved his life. The judge's memory flooded back to a time in 2003 when he had been a field medic serving in Iraq. During a violent ambush near Fallujah, Walter Carter had driven a burning supply truck away from their position, saving the lives of 17 soldiers, including the judge himself. Despite sustaining injuries in the process, Walter had kept going, ensuring the safety of his comrades. The judge's mind raced as he recalled the days following that event. Walter had never sought recognition for his bravery, and after the war, the judge had tried unsuccessfully to locate him. Walter had disappeared into civilian life, his heroism buried beneath the weight of the years that followed. The judge had never even known his full name, only hearing Carter shouted across the battlefield as he was carried to safety. Now, as he stared at the file in front of him, he realized that this man, this quiet, weathered man who had been forgotten by society, was the very person who had saved his life. The revelation left the judge shaken, his emotions raw. He had spent years searching for Walter, but the man he once owed his life to had slipped through the cracks of the system. And now he was standing before him, charged with a crime that seemed so trivial compared to the heroism he had once displayed. Walter Carter was not just another homeless man. He was a symbol of loyalty and sacrifice, a man who had been forgotten by the country he had served. In that moment, Judge Carmichael knew that this trial would take a different path. He couldn't dismiss the case outright due to his personal connection, but he could ensure that Walter's story would be heard and that justice for once would be done. Walter Carter was no ordinary man. He was a soldier who had answered the call of duty not once but multiple times across some of the most dangerous and grueling conflicts in modern military history. His story was one of sacrifice, bravery, and an unyielding commitment to his country. Yet despite the countless lives he saved and the heroic feats he achieved during his service, Walter was eventually forgotten by the very system he had fought to protect. His tale serves as a stark reminder of the cost of war, the burden of sacrifice, and the heartbreaking reality faced by many veterans when they return home. Walter's military journey began when he enlisted in the U.S. Army, and over the span of 2 decades, he would go on to serve in 3 combat tours, 2 in Iraq and 1 in Afghanistan. His expertise in logistics was invaluable, ensuring that supplies reached the front lines during the most perilous stages of the conflicts. These missions, often carried out under the constant threat of enemy fire, were critical to maintaining the operational efficiency of the military. But it was in the face of danger that Walter truly became a hero. One of the defining moments of Walter's military career came in 2003 during a violent ambush in Iraq. While leading a convoy through a treacherous stretch of road, their vehicles were suddenly attacked by enemy forces. The assault was intense and chaotic, with bullets flying and explosions rocking the convoy. But Walter, instead of seeking cover or retreating, made a decision that would change the course of many lives. As the convoy was ambushed, a burning fuel truck threatened to explode, putting everyone in its vicinity in grave danger. Walter, driven by an instinct to protect his comrades, took action without hesitation. He jumped into the burning vehicle and managed to drive it away from the vulnerable soldiers, steering it to a safer location. In doing so, he not only saved the lives of 17 soldiers, but also sustained injuries from the flames and shrapnel. Despite his own wounds, Walter's first priority was the safety of those around him. This act of extraordinary bravery earned him the Bronze Star for Valor, a prestigious military honor, recognizing his selfless courage under fire. But Walter's heroism didn't end with the ambush. He would later become a symbol of compassion and resilience during a humanitarian mission in Afghanistan. One fateful day, as Walter and his unit were providing aid in a conflict zone, they came across an injured Afghan child. In the chaos of the battle, with gunfire and explosions ringing in the distance, Walter saw the child, and without thinking twice, he carried the young girl to a medical helicopter, saving her life. That image of Walter carrying the child, taken by a military photographer, would later make the front page of the New York Times, capturing the world's attention and briefly making Walter a symbol of American compassion in the midst of war. Despite these heroic deeds, Walter's story, like those of many veterans, did not have the ending it deserved. After his discharge from the Army, Walter returned home to a world that had little regard for the sacrifices he had made. The trauma of war, compounded by the grief of losing his wife Evelyn and the failure of the VA hospital to properly diagnose her cancer, sent him spiraling into depression, unable to cope with his loss. Walter withdrew from his family, sold their modest apartment, and disappeared into the streets of New York. His return to civilian life was marred by untreated PTSD and a broken trust in the system that had failed him, and he lived as a shadow of the man who had once been hailed as a hero. For years, Walter wandered the streets, collecting bottles and cans to survive, all the while carrying with him the memories of his service, the men he had saved, the lives he had touched, and the image of the little girl he had carried to safety. But despite the weight of his past, he kept moving forward, never asking for help, and never seeking recognition. Walter Carter's story is one that many veterans know all too well. Despite their service, their sacrifice, and their heroism, they often return home to be forgotten, left to battle their demons alone. For Walter, his military legacy was a reminder of who he had been, a man who had saved lives and given everything for his country. Yet when he needed help the most, the country he had served so faithfully turned its back on him. His story is not just about the battles he fought in Iraq and Afghanistan. It is about the battle many veterans face when they come home facing a system that fails to recognize their worth, their sacrifices, and their need for support. Walter Carter, a man who had once been a symbol of bravery and compassion, was now a forgotten hero living in the shadows of the streets he had once sworn to protect. His story is a call to action, a reminder that we must never forget the men and women who serve, and that we must do more to ensure that they are cared for when they return home. Walter's military service was a testament to his courage, but his life after service speaks volumes about the failures of a system that failed to honor him. It's time to remember Walter Carter, not just as a soldier, but as a man who gave everything, and in return was left behind. The courtroom was filled with tension as the truth behind Walter Carter's years of suffering began to unravel. What had appeared to be a routine legal case, an elderly homeless man charged with petty theft, soon transformed into a revelation of systemic failure, neglect, and the tragic consequences of bureaucratic indifference. As Judge Michael Carmichael dug deeper into Walter's military history, he uncovered a devastating truth. Walter, the man who had once served his country with unwavering loyalty, had been denied his rightful benefits due to an administrative error. When the judge, after learning of Walter's past, began reviewing the veteran's service records, a shocking discovery was made. Walter, who had served 3 tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, had been entitled to substantial military benefits, pension, and medical care following his discharge in 2004. However, a crucial error had occurred within the VA system. The paperwork, which was essential for processing Walter's benefits, had been sent to an outdated address, causing Walter's benefits to be mistakenly terminated. For years, Walter had been living without the financial support he was rightfully entitled to, despite having served his country with distinction. The mistake had cost Walter more than just money. It had cost him his dignity, his health, and his ability to heal from the wounds, both physical and emotional, that he had sustained during his time in service. The error meant that Walter had gone without the $1,370 per month in benefits he was owed, totaling over $246,000 in unpaid funds. In addition to the financial strain, Walter had been denied the medical care he needed to treat service-related injuries, including the burns and shrapnel wounds he had sustained while saving the lives of 17 soldiers in a 2003 ambush in Iraq. As Judge Carmichael uncovered this injustice, the courtroom began to shift. What had initially seemed like a case of theft and homelessness became a case of systemic failure, one that had led a war hero to live in the shadows of society. The judge's voice, once stern and detached, now carried a weight of compassion and frustration as he shared the findings with the court. Walter Carter is not just any defendant. Judge Carmichael declared, his voice firm with conviction. He is a man whose loyalty and sacrifices have been forgotten by the very system he served. He has been denied the benefits and care that are rightfully his. The courtroom fell silent as the implications of this discovery sank in. Walter, the man who had been treated as an invisible, worthless individual by so many, was revealed to be a victim of an unforgivable mistake. His years of suffering, his time spent on the streets, his health deteriorating without proper care. It was all a consequence of this error, a flaw in a system that was supposed to protect him. But it wasn't just the judge's findings that changed the course of the case. As the truth emerged, Walter's former comrades in arms and other key witnesses stepped forward to offer their support. These were the men and women who had fought alongside Walter in Iraq and Afghanistan, who had seen him put his life on the line for others, who had witnessed firsthand his bravery and loyalty. They rallied behind him, offering testimony that spoke to his character, his courage, and the integrity that had made him a hero on the battlefield. Colonel James Mason, who had served with Walter in Iraq, was one of the first to speak out. With unwavering certainty, he addressed the court. "This man saved my life," he said, his voice steady. "During an ambush near Fallujah, Walter did not hesitate. He drove a burning truck away from our convoy, saving 17 soldiers, including myself. He didn't think twice. He just acted, and that's the kind of person Walter is." His words were met with murmurs from the courtroom, as the true magnitude of Walter's heroism began to sink in. But it wasn't just Colonel Mason who came forward. Other veterans, friends, and military colleagues attested to Walter's character, painting a picture of a man who had selflessly served his country only to be betrayed by the system meant to support him. As these testimonies poured in, Judge Carmichael's resolve grew stronger. He had already made up his mind. Walter Carter deserved justice, not just for the theft he had been charged with, but for the years of neglect he had endured at the hands of a broken bureaucracy. In light of the new information, the judge made an immediate decision to postpone the proceedings until a full investigation could be conducted into Walter's benefits. The prosecutor, although initially reluctant, could not ignore the mounting evidence, and supported the judge's decision to dismiss the charges. But that wasn't all. The judge took further action to right the wrongs Walter had suffered. He ordered that Walter be immediately provided with a proper meal and medical attention, something he had been deprived of for far too long. The courtroom, once a place of indifference, had become a space of recognition and acknowledgement for the man who had once been invisible to society. This revelation did not just end in the courtroom. It sparked a wave of support from the public, who were appalled by the injustices Walter had faced. Within hours, a veterans organization had set up a fund for Walter, raising over $200,000 in donations. People shared their own stories of veterans who had fallen through the cracks, pushing for legislative changes and a reevaluation of the VA's systems. Through the discovery of this administrative error, Walter Carter's story went from one of despair to one of redemption. The benefits he was rightfully owed were finally restored, and he was given the opportunity to heal, not just physically but emotionally as well. For the first time in years, Walter was seen for who he truly was: a hero, a soldier, and a man who deserved to be treated with respect and dignity. Walter's journey didn't end in the courtroom. It marked the beginning of a long overdue recognition for the sacrifices made by veterans like him, who had been ignored and forgotten by a system that should have taken better care of them. As his benefits were reinstated, Walter's story became a catalyst for change, inspiring others to advocate for those who had served this country but were left behind by it. As the court proceedings continued, a palpable shift occurred in the atmosphere of the courtroom. What had initially seemed like an ordinary case of theft involving a homeless man had now become something far more significant, an indictment of the system that had failed Walter Carter a decorated war hero for far too long. Judge Michael Carmichael, having uncovered the truth behind Walter's years of suffering and the bureaucratic errors that had denied him his rightful benefits, decided to take immediate action. With the mounting evidence of Walter's past heroism and the unjust treatment he had faced, the judge made an unprecedented decision. In light of the new information, Judge Carmichael announced, "I am dismissing all charges against Mr. Carter. The defendant will receive a proper meal and medical attention immediately." The courtroom, which had once been filled with indifference, now buzzed with a sense of justice being served at long last. Walter, who had lived on the streets for years, was finally being treated with the dignity and respect he deserved. The decision to dismiss the charges was only the beginning of the changes that followed. The case had brought to light a deeper issue: how veterans like Walter, who had sacrificed so much for their country, were often left to fend for themselves after their service. This revelation struck a chord with the public, and the response was overwhelming. A fundraising campaign quickly gained traction, and within days a veterans organization had raised more than $200,000 for Walter's care and well-being. The funds were meant not only to help him get back on his feet, but also to provide him with the medical treatment and support he had been denied for years. Walter's story, once a tale of a forgotten man lost in the streets, became a national conversation about the treatment of veterans and the harsh realities of homelessness. People across the country were moved by his plight and began to question how society had allowed someone who had once served with such valor to fall through the cracks. His case became a powerful symbol of the need for systemic change in how the nation supports its veterans, particularly those who struggle with mental health issues, PTSD, and the burdens of war. As Walter's story spread, it prompted calls for reform from both the public and lawmakers. The government, which had once failed Walter so profoundly, now had no choice but to address the issues that had led to his neglect. The VA began reviewing cases of veterans whose benefits had been improperly terminated, ensuring that such mistakes would not continue. Meanwhile, social media buzzed with discussions about the invisible veterans who had been left behind, and the steps needed to prevent more stories like Walter's from unfolding. For Walter, the legal battle was over, but the fight for his dignity and well-being was just beginning. He moved into a veterans housing program in Brooklyn, finally finding a place to call home. His small apartment, modest yet filled with cherished photographs of his wife Evelyn and his military service, became a symbol of his journey from invisibility to recognition. The quiet man who had once wandered the streets of Brooklyn was now embraced by a community that had long overlooked him. His story not only earned him a second chance at life, but also sparked a broader movement to ensure that no other veteran would be left forgotten or abandoned. Walter Carter's trial may have been about a loaf of bread, but in the end it was about so much more. It was about justice, redemption, and the undeniable truth that those who serve their country deserve to be cared for, honored, and seen no matter where life may take them. After years of living on the fringes of society, Walter Carter's life took an unexpected turn when, following the courtroom revelations, he was finally given the recognition and support he had long been denied. As his case garnered national attention, it was not only the legal system that took notice. A pivotal moment in Walter's journey came when a woman named Clara, his late wife Evelyn's niece, stepped into the picture. Clara had spent years trying to find Walter, worried about his well-being, and hoping to reconnect with the family member who had been lost to the streets. She had never given up on him despite the years of silence. When Clara found Walter, it was a deeply emotional reunion. The man who had once been an invisible, forgotten figure was now embraced by the family that had lost contact with him after his downward spiral into homelessness. The moment of their reunion was a turning point in Walter's life, one that symbolized not just a personal connection being restored, but the rekindling of his place in the world. It was the first time in years that Walter had experienced the warmth of human connection that wasn't associated with police officers or strangers on the streets. Clara's presence offered Walter a sense of comfort and hope that he had not known since the death of his beloved wife, Evelyn. This moment of reunion also marked the beginning of Walter's recognition as more than just a homeless man. He was a hero, a veteran, and someone worthy of dignity. In the wake of the legal proceedings, Walter's story became a beacon for change. People across the country were moved by his experience, and a special fund was established to support homeless veterans like him. The fund quickly raised more than $200,000, providing not just financial assistance, but also creating a platform for further discussions about how veterans are treated in society. Walter, once ignored and discarded, was now seen as a symbol of the struggles faced by many who served their country but were forgotten by the very system they had defended. Walter's newfound recognition went beyond monetary support. He began to speak out about the challenges that veterans face when they return home, especially those who suffer from PTSD trauma, and the alienation that often accompanies a life lived on the margins. His story resonated particularly with young people who had never truly understood the sacrifices made by veterans. Walter shared his experiences with local schools explaining the realities of military service and the hardships faced by those who return from war, often unnoticed and unappreciated. Through these interactions, Walter became a voice for change, helping to educate the next generation about the importance of supporting and honoring veterans, not just during their service, but throughout their lives. As Walter's story continued to unfold, he moved into a supportive housing community for veterans in Brooklyn, a place he could finally call home after years of homelessness. His small apartment was modest but filled with meaningful memories, photographs of Evelyn, his military service, and his old unit in Iraq. Walter also kept a new picture on the wall, one of him and Judge Carmichael standing together at a veterans recognition ceremony. This was no longer just a man living on the streets. This was Walter Carter, a man who had fought for his country, had been forgotten, but was now finally being seen for who he truly was. His story, which had once been defined by neglect and abandonment, had transformed into one of redemption, recognition, and hope. Walter had found his place in society again, not as a homeless veteran, but as a hero who had finally been given the care and respect he deserved. His journey was a testament to the power of second chances and the importance of never giving up on those who have given so much for others. Walter Carter was finally home, surrounded by the love of family and the recognition of a nation that had at long last started to see him for the hero he truly was. Walter Carter's story became more than just a personal tale of hardship and redemption. It sparked a nationwide conversation about how veterans are treated after their service. Once a forgotten man, Walter's plight revealed the deep flaws in the system that left many veterans without the care and support they needed. His journey from being a homeless, ignored individual to a national symbol of resilience and courage brought the issues faced by veterans into the spotlight, compelling the public and lawmakers to take action. As Walter's case unfolded, it became clear that this was not just about one man's struggle. It was about the thousands of veterans who were silently suffering, overlooked by the very government they had served. His story became a rallying cry for justice, urging society to recognize the sacrifices made by veterans and to ensure that those who return home are treated with the dignity and respect they deserve. Walter's newfound recognition didn't just end with his personal victory. It ignited change in policy and a reassessment of how veterans' benefits were administered. The public outcry following his case led to widespread discussions about the need for reform within the VA system and the importance of providing better support for veterans. The establishment of funds and initiatives aimed at helping homeless veterans was one immediate result, and the call for systemic changes in the treatment of veterans became a focal point for lawmakers. No longer anonymous, Walter Carter became a powerful voice for the many veterans who had been forgotten. His story was a stark reminder that justice, though sometimes delayed, could ultimately prevail, and when it did, it carried the power to change lives and create a more just society for those who had served their country. Walter Carter's story teaches us several powerful lessons about justice recognition and the importance of never overlooking the sacrifices of others. First, it highlights how easily society can forget those who have given so much for their country, especially veterans. Despite his heroism and selflessness, Walter spent years in homelessness and neglect, illustrating the failures in systems designed to support those who have served. This calls us to reflect on how we treat others, particularly those who may be struggling in silence. Second, Walter's journey reminds us of the importance of recognizing individuals for who they truly are. It's easy to judge someone by their circumstances without understanding their past or their worth. Walter was able to find justice and recognition only after his story was heard, showing us that empathy and open-mindedness are crucial in fostering a more compassionate society. Finally, his case is a call to action, urging us to advocate for fairness and to ensure that systems of support, whether for veterans, the homeless, or the vulnerable, are functioning as they should. Justice may be delayed, but it is never too late to right a wrong and ensure that no one is forgotten.